Cyberpunk 2077. Night City. Guns, violence, sex, drugs, rock and roll. This hyper-expensive, open-world interpretation of Michael Pondsmith's tabletop RPG really has it all. Or at least, it eventually did. It's been over a decade since developer CD Projekt Red unveiled Cyberpunk 2077 with an extremely detailed trailer featuring a frozen confrontation between a cyberpsycho and NCPD's elite Max TAC unit. The concluding seconds featured a smirky when it's ready release date. It would have been hard to even nail one down at that point anyway, since the Polish developer was still working hard on The Witcher 3, a game that would become so popular that it would raise the profile of not just the company, but Poland as a country. As full production began, CD Projekt took to Microsoft's E3 conferences to unveil some really flashy trailers from what would become the game's extremely cinematic first hour. In a huge turn, they brought out Keanu Reeves in a breathtaking stage reveal to announce his role as the game's co-protagonist, Johnny Silverhand. In the years that followed, there were delays, yes, tales of crunch and poor work environments, yes, but it looked like an epic adventure that would be worth all the bad reports. You could even buy a Cyberpunk-branded Xbox One X console. And then the game came out. This video isn't going to relitigate the game's disastrous launch. No one who picks this game up and plays it for the first time sight unseen is going to care about any of that. It's ancient history. Heck, I guarantee lots of people who do remember the rightfully deserved backlash aren't still dwelling on it. There are thousands of videos about that already, and I've seen most of them, even if I can't remember what most of them said anymore. Crobycat's meta-critique of the game speaks loudly about its early, very broken condition. Noah Caldwell-Gervais and Action Button labored long for their exhaustive verdicts, so I'm not here to retread old ground in the 1.0 verse of post-launch Cyberpunk 2077. I'm here making this video because I waited over a decade to play it. That wasn't my intention though. I wanted to dive deep into CD Projekt Red's magnum opus at launch, but I didn't have any gaming hardware that could run it. In retrospect, I don't feel too bad. It turns out that even the people who did couldn't run it either. As the waves of criticism lapped at the game's reputation and the company that built it, I vowed that I would come back to review this game after they'd made good on fixing its numerous issues and completed its planned story expansion. That expansion eventually became known as Phantom Liberty, starring a digitized Idris Elba. But I'm here now because they've finally done it. They've made good on their promises to gamers and shareholders alike with a 2.0 re-release, retool, and repair that, with the expansion included, comes within a whip crack of being gaming's most genuine comeback story. In waiting over 10 years to review Cyberpunk 2077, I can play it as originally intended and then tempered even further because of exhaustive player feedback and outright fire in the years since its disastrous release. I can finally dive into Night City's mix of oppressive megacorps and electronic warfare in a game that somehow marries the best mechanics of open-world actioners like Grand Theft Auto and immersive sims like Deus Ex. So what is Cyberpunk 2077 now? And is it worthy of your upgrade points? Let's jack in and find out. It may not be the first, but it is the nth review, number 23 for Cyberpunk 2077, brought to you by my patrons at patreon.com/the nth review. From Patreon producer James Just a Bald Guy Wyatt, had Projekt Red not oversold and underdelivered, Cyberpunk 2077 would have been awesome for me. The looks, the world, the style, the gear, all amazing vaporware gloss and glory. But the cities were boring, stagnant, full of civilians who walk in circles, and cars that drive forever. None of the interesting aspects the devs promised came to be. Add to it, almost every mission was simply go here, shoot X amount of guys and return in different locations, and speech checks with minimal impact to the story if any. Just too repetitive. Cyberpunk borrows so much from the American 1980s that the original RPG was created in, like its entrenched meritocratic cruelty. But there's so much more. So many characters are probably worried at some level about the ascendant Japan as an economic and technological power. Boomboxes blast beats in dirty alleys. Megacorps dominate the world physically, economically, and socially, motivated by an all-encompassing hyper-capitalism. Ads are visible streaking into the sky from miles away, but also in elevators, TV channels, the underside of massive sky bridges, backyards. Virtually any surface or empty space is prime real estate to sell you something. Most everything you do in the game is run by independent fixers, data brokers, or affiliates of those very megacorps. When the Tokyo-based Arasaka departs Night City in my ending of Phantom Liberty, Militech fills the void in a scary, drastic way. And that's as if people aren't worried about those megacorps making local governments their administrative playthings. An issue I had with Grand Theft Auto 5, despite its complexity compared to previous games, and don't forget to check out my review for that too, was the lack of any kind of politics at all in such a complex city. It feels like there's an actual governing body here behind the scenes managing things, and it's not just the result of someone spending too much time with a cityscape editor. And I realize, before you shoot down to the comment section, that Grand Theft Auto is supposed to be a big and dumb commentary on modern society, viewed through the kaleidoscope of popular American movies and other media. It's not supposed to have meaningful ideas or express genuine insight. I get it. But Cyberpunk satisfies my craving for meaningful city administration in an interesting way, especially in how its government works with the police department. Cyberpunk opens like a threat. Lots of people are out for you, and many confrontations end with violence. You gain street cred by taking out thugs and completing missions, which open new gigs, vendors, and opportunities. There are gangs everywhere. Street justice is the most popular flavor of retribution. Everyone everywhere is ready to stab you in the back to get their grab. Even the ambulance service, which comes at a hefty premium, is armed to the teeth, their medics lined with protective armor. As you try to help, they'll bark orders at you as if you're a military recruit. Even with their heavy armor and heavier attitudes, there are neighborhoods they won't go to, leaving healthcare in Night City to a lot of doctors set up in the back rooms of less than reputable operations. On the other hand, the Night City Police Department is so indifferent to what's going on that even as I nuke a group of civilians or run them down on the side of the street, they don't really care all that much. When you're on a job, lighting up an entire outdoor district with gunfire as you slash a gang to bits, they are nowhere to be seen. You could view this as bad gameplay, but I think there's more there. The NCPD feels more like a janitorial service than anything, an agent to sweep away the mess when the big dogs go at it, and then tread lightly when their work seeks to bring about any actual justice, lest their handlers' whims be disturbed. Peek a little closer and you realize that the police here are incredibly corrupt. As the game begins, the mayor is dead and you get to participate in the investigation into what happened to him. As you peel away the layers, you get to experience the city's deeply entrenched tech-enabled manipulation by unknown, powerful hands. You even get to work with a city councilor running for mayor in the subsequent special election, and the rabbit hole goes even further. Cyberpunk's criminals have had time and space to harden into their violent, belligerent personalities, but the cops here, when they give a shit, go pretty hard too. I didn't do any kind of analysis on what features didn't materialize or work properly at launch for this review, but I do know that cops wouldn't initially pursue you if you caused trouble. Now they do, with a full 5-star rating evocative of Grand Theft Auto. To their credit, I could never exceed a 3-star rating before NCPD wiped the streets with me, but I also had to get that higher ranking very intentionally. Through the rest of the game, as violent or careless as I would get, I would hit a single star and it would gradually fizzle out. In the handful of times it surpassed that, I'd hide and they would move on. This is a dark game in a dark world with mature themes, riding along with a kind of greasy unease. The story even leads you to watch first-person snuff films, which are extreme brain dances, or XBDs. As a student of Reagan's drug and gang education programs, Night City's dark side is the futuristic worst-case scenario of those hypothetical failures. With the number of kids running around this town, it seems like a small but lost opportunity that they didn't have some parallel youth education program with an interesting acronym. But as severe as this game gets, its brutality and darkness is primarily reflected through the quests of its main storyline. It takes the most grisly, high-tension parts of its experience and the most horrifying corners of its world and puts them right before your eyes in the most important content of the game. As you progress and the play counter starts creeping into the dozens of hours and you start moving further into the side gigs, this edge starts to become a little less severe. The tension releases a bit, your gut clenches less. In time, it winds up feeling more like the genre standard, but obviously a bit more sophisticated and a few shades darker. As much as I love the shape, feel, and complexity of GTA 5 San Andreas, my favorite city in an open worlder up to this point, it was built for a game that shipped around the time that the teaser for this game did. Cyberpunk not only gets a technological edge, but Night City also benefits from its futuristic setting, incorporating architecture and complexity that wouldn't make much sense thematically in a game set in the present day. This section is brought to you by Nth City, my second channel about urban activism. Be sure to subscribe today at youtube.com/the Nth City. The buildings of Night City's downtown core are unrealistically large and overbuilt, even interconnected. Hell, they even make the epic structures of Starfield's New Atlantis look like a Boy Scout camp by comparison. Night City's footprint isn't large, but the architecture you encounter is extremely memorable, like the massive roof of sky bridges and superstructure above you. Its numbered mega buildings, similar to those of Judge Dredd's Mega City 1, are massive mixed-use towers, where a good meal and a gun shop are a small walk from your apartment, 15 stories in the air. Reflecting its heavy themes of the social impact of technology and its ever-present physical hardware, Night City feels like a complex piece of electronics all its own. Layers of urbanism are stacked on top of each other with elaborate road and pedestrian infrastructure serving as the wires between them. It creates maze-like configurations, tucked away graffiti-covered alleyways, and even entire neighborhoods nestled between buildings. The city is walkable to such an extent that it feels unrealistic. One of these pedestrian bridges is expensive in the real world, but they're everywhere here. Streams of concrete and metal send you up and down and over and under. Streets in the city feature grade separations between pedestrian sidewalks and cars, with hefty curbs and breakaway barriers of metal and concrete. Usually. There are plenty of stop signs and stop lights, but cars will still brake in crosswalks. Jerks. On and off ramps often feel a bit severe in elevation changes and in how briefly you have to change lanes or use them. Even out in the countryside, exits are abrupt and short, lacking realistically long merge or slip lanes. The complexity of the city and its idiosyncrasies evoked memories of Jet Set Radio Future, where its Tokyo would sometimes haphazardly stack buildings on top of each other, like piles of Monopoly board game pieces. Zoomed out a little bit, Night City's California shoreline location presents a variety of neighborhoods and urban densities that let you appreciate the true diversity on display here. Yes, you have the incredible urban core with its impossible architecture, but there are gentle, lower-density suburban areas with humble homes alongside rough industrial zones with plenty of overstaffed convenience stores. A lot of work was put in to make the city culturally different from block to block, where different gangs carry influence, from its cold urban memorials featuring geometric concrete slabs, to its shanty towns, to trailer parks, where families eke out a living on the municipal edge. The crosswalks are vibrant and literally animated in the city core, but look like worn-down paint just a few blocks away. You can even swim, if you want to. The weather system augments the local moods, too. Rainy and foggy nights transition to hazy days. Overcast skies highlight the core's elaborate neon lighting. If it was a scene in Blade Runner 2049, it's probably reproduced dynamically here in Cyberpunk. Beyond the city, which ends rather abruptly, I should add, are the Badlands, the game's vast rural sprawl featuring rolling terrain, desert plains, and lightly populated camps. It's distinct from the city in the way that the countryside of GTA 5 is, but it's far more naturalistic, not feeling the need to push you toward another interesting location. Ride too far out into this desert, and the game will warn you to turn around. There are gas stations and fast travel points, but there's also the city's massive untapped landfill that's very difficult to traverse, especially with vehicles. Perhaps the most exciting part of moving through the world of Cyberpunk in and out of buildings is that you're never presented with a load screen. Ever. Not unless you're fast traveling, loading from a save, or booting from scratch, which was, unfortunately, a bit too often with all of the game's crashes. This was very refreshing coming off Starfield, which is another review you should watch. Check it out. There are some lowlights here, though. Night City and its surrounding areas feel like a beautiful, largely plausible, incredibly detailed place you can visit, but it never quite feels like a place you live in, even as you spend dozens of hours roaming it, probing its overwhelming number of corners and conduits. There's really no point in laying down roots or becoming familiar with any neighborhood in particular. You have an apartment, and you can buy and acquire other properties around town, but I never felt compelled to visit them until quests need you to. I guess that's still a bit of a step up from the excessively large and less than useful properties you have in GTA 5. Cars and pedestrians still also adhere to the same empty-headed programmatic behavior that GTA pedestrians do. Follow one, and before long, it's clear that their existence doesn't make any sense. It works when you don't look at it too long and run by really fast, but it begins to fall apart upon any kind of inspection. There are even kids out here walking alone at night, cradling their arms because the people here, as numerous and diverse as they are just there to create the illusion of a dense, busy city. To that end, I guess they've succeeded. Zooming out even further, Night City is large, but its ideas feel so much bigger. They feel real. It never feels like you've got a firm grasp on everything that's going on, and it feels good, rather than confusing. The megacorps and factions justify their existence by existing, not through elaborate introductions and lengthy expository dialogue. There's always something around the corner. The horizon always feels further and further away as you approach it. There are chunks of the city that the game doesn't do much with, like the big Biotechnica complex in the south end of town, or the prison out in the ocean. It's fun to imagine what happens there, even if quests never send you in that direction. The game doesn't overwhelm with lore, and if you get lost, there's a database of brief articles that help you along a bit. There are those who will complain about not seeing enough Militech in this game, or the fact that you won't run into NCPD's high-end MaxTac division from the teaser trailer, except for a handful of very specific situations. I actually thought it was amazing to leave some things in the background and focus on what's happening right before you. And the game has plenty of foreground to show you.
Animal-like. It's that no virtue shit. He knows it's that foul, but he'll pay chip. So Gina, what she do?
The same year that Cyberpunk 2077 was unveiled to the world was the same year that I was introduced to synthwave and outrun as musical genres. It's not that they didn't exist before then, but my immersion in artists like Young Galaxy, Gunship, and Carpenter Brute evoked a mood that echoed so many musical touchstones of my childhood without obsessively replicating them. You're going to encounter, artistically, plenty of stuff that is and isn't anachronistic, but all inspired by that 80s retro future aesthetic, which is literally the name of the game. Electronics are everywhere, fashionable and unfashionable. There are holographic projections everywhere, neon lights up back alleys and storefronts, while recessed incandescent lighting illuminates indoor venues. Many of the vehicles look ripped from Mattel design blackboards and Sid Mead's sketchbooks, complete with asymmetric headlights and chonky angular dashboards that match some of the world's toilets. There are no cassettes here, but there are some rare vinyls. This is a world of solid state and hard drives. Shards are basically long SD cards that slide into your head for mission information rather than weird shit like data crystals or whatever. Displays aren't CRTs, they're big digital panels that are a little beyond what we have today. It's actually fun to visit old locations and see their older LCD displays smudging and ghosting due to the marquees of cop cars. And then there are arcade games to play, styled in a higher-res 32-bit 2D. They had so many people working on this game that they made some pretty convincing games within the game. Cyberpunk is pretty easily the most beautiful game I've ever seen. Nearly every frame is a glorious work of art, and it was rarely unbeautiful. Its look has been thoroughly considered, clearly the result of hundreds of artists running on the best pixel-pushing technology. It's cinematic as hell. So much work has been put into placing and manipulating the camera, blocking characters, then scripting the events around you, and layering on special effects in a world full of incredibly designed settings and props. Sometimes the illusion lapses, like a lot of those sequences where you're a passenger in a vehicle, and the pace seems hand-animated, stilted, and weird rather than physics-based. At that point, the vehicle feels more like a roller coaster ride than something that another person is controlling, even if, yes, they're a virtual person. The world is high contrast and crisp, uses the whole color palette, and looks visually punchy, even in the huge patches of the map that aren't defined by unnatural man-made geometry and exotic light sources. I don't usually like to comment about software HDR unless it's done poorly, but the HDR here is incredibly good as you come in and out of dark towering areas into a blast of bright sunlight and back. There are so many details everywhere, which makes the place truly feel lived in and real. There are vendors with modeled food like hot dogs. The 25-hour-a-day corner store is chock full of sodas and snacks and rentable brain dances on metal racks. I wasn't trying to make that rhyme, but those are some pretty slick bars if you ask me. Many of the world's computer displays are glossy and reflective, which looks cool, but it doesn't help utility much. People are very detailed, which makes them very believable. Because it's a AAA game, the game includes a photo mode, and the UI everywhere, all the time, is animating and doing stuff crisp and clean through all it does. The graphical distractions are some inherent to lighting and shading big environments. Shadows and lights will pop in as you approach them, especially distracting when approaching the huge buildings of the downtown core. Similarly, while driving in the rain, sections of pavement under bridges will pop from wet to dry. One really weird bug came when viewing the camera feed of the Japantown parade inside Hanako Arasaka's float, and huge holographic fish are clipping through it very strangely. I'm no expert on large-scale holographic displays, but I don't know if CD Projekt accurately reproduced what would actually be happening here. Points off for realism. Lack of realism, I should say. Like any open world game, there are going to be bugs and glitches, many of which are split-second small things. Character animations will rarely jump between animation phases rather than tween between them. During a final campaign quest, an elite guard got stuck in a Zen garden, then fell 20 feet through the world when I shot him, requiring a mission restart. There were a lot of crashes, especially entering Dogtown, that I didn't expect from a game this far after release. I'm calling it a glitch, but having the game switch quest markers when receiving an incoming call in the middle of a mission was a pain in the butt, and it seemed to happen more often in the late game. Cyberpunk also initially had a lot of issues with saving the game, presumably something to do with cross-platform save functionality, which meant that the game would try to save, but the icon would just sit there spinning forever. The resolution was to simply hit the home button and reselect the game from the menu. It got better in time, but I also lost chunks of progress starting out as a result. Cyberpunk's electronic and orchestral score is absolutely incredible, building tension like no other game I've ever experienced. It's a brace of darkwave tracks with grinding synths demand your attention. The organ drones when your pal Jackie dies are tough to swallow, while the electronic loop that plays over the hacking minigame sounds a lot like the menu music from Geometry Wars 2. The masterful ASMR-level whisper sequence when you're stuck behind a digital screen in a hotel penthouse watching Yorinobu Arasaka murder his dad is next-level immersion that I didn't truly appreciate when I played it.
I thought Atom Smasher, Bodyguard, Wars, Night City Legend, Bleak motherfucking one too. What's the play? We wait.
Also, think what you will of electronic pop artist Grimes and her connection to Elon Musk and her apparent inability to handle live sets at Coachella. She has a few chill bangers here as in-world character and singer Lizzie Wizzy. Thankfully, she gave her songs easily describable titles.
You in some trouble?
Not yet. Right now, I just need a soul I can trust.
That kinda sounded like a yes. Meet me at Lizzie's. Be there in an hour.
So you have a world that's well established with a presentation that's world class. How do you bring players into it all? Well, you craft an elaborate onboarding sequence, of course. You can tell the first few hours of the game went through numerous and expensive iterations to ensure that you are on the rails as firmly as possible, and the sights and sounds along the way thrill you. The set dressing, especially early on, is incredibly designed and detailed. The Corpo Plaza just outside the mega building you live in is full of detail, so stepping out is overwhelming in the most interesting and exciting way every single time you do it. There are tons of little details too. The Afterlife bar is one of the most beautiful settings I've ever seen, but then your pal Jackie will jiggle his leg nervously during a mission briefing in the back. I made a very deliberate decision early on to not play through the game's various character classes, intros, and endings, and this is just how I play any game. I'm not interested in going through all the various permutations and possibilities, even if I end up watching the alternate outcomes on YouTube later. IGN and other content farms have already speedrun those offerings. My goal is to build a character and make choices that reflect who I am as a person. Role-playing is exhausting, to me. As the game begins, you go through the genre standards. Difficulty, I chose hard, which worked out really well, and the character builder, which actually amounts to more than a hill of beans in this game, since the game actually shows you off periodically. But in these opening moments, you also get to pick a trio of backstories, which the game inserts you into midstream. This is very different than some other games, which provide a small parcel of flavor text and a few pre-selected character traits. Independent of any choices you make, you play V, the hero or anti-hero of the game. With my own background in retail and a brief tour at headquarters, I picked a corpo start. Fading in, my V is tossing their cookies into a corporate sink, an Arasaka corporate sink, because I'm a counter-intel dude for the Japanese megacorp. A brief call puts me in touch with my pal Jackie, and as I'm on my way to see my boss Jenkins, I'm inundated with references to operations that happened all around the world that V reacts to with knowing confidence, as I'm slightly confused. Here's an acquaintance I haven't seen in some time who meets a grisly end later on. You are embedded into this company. Arasaka keeps track of my health and has a real-time ticker along the top of my screen, even having my personal trainer guru give me a ring while out on assignment. After a flight to a local bar, you meet with Jackie and then agents of your boss's boss, Abernathy, who decides you no longer work there anymore. Thanks to your pal, you get to stay alive. Jackie's loyalty and easy ability to inflict violence on your behalf reflects one of the strong glues that seem to keep this society of broken glass shards together. A thorough tutorial provided virtually presents just about everything you could possibly need to know about the game, to the extent that's a bit overwhelming. It's stranger still that you can't revisit these later on when you need to reintroduce yourself to specific mechanics. It's a one-time deal. Initially, some of the controls feel disorienting, like getting in and out of vehicles for a while. With gameplay that's a little bit more sophisticated than its contemporaries, there are some trade-offs that CD Projekt had to make control-wise to fit them all on here on a consistent basis, even if they're not consistent with, say, other open-worlders. Thankfully, the game presents control schemes on screen whenever you do anything, so you can always orient yourself to nearly any game mode or weapon set in the game without needing the tutorial, a tutorial the game doesn't let you revisit anyway. I keep bringing it up, but it made revisiting Blade's gameplay difficult later on. Cyberpunk's biggest philosophical tackles are questions of humanity and the self. What is a person? And through technological augmentation, when are they not one? If you've been following this channel for more than a minute, you know that this is a common thread among so many immersive sims I've reviewed. It's interesting that so many games that present choice in gameplay also present questions about identity and personhood. Nearly everyone in Cyberpunk 2077 is enhanced by cyberware. Limbs, hands, internal organs, interconnections, everything. Lots of people have robotic hands, including Mr. Hands, but some people have been completely chromed out. Literally, they look like C-3PO's cousins. The world's hackers, called netrunners here, don't just feature onboard computational power to get their work done. They also have little USB-style cables that unreel from their wrists, enabling a personal connection, machine to machine. When netrunners take on more elaborate operations, they're dunked in ice water to prevent overheating, as vast amounts of electricity flows through their biological body. Netrunners will even have electronic bricks in the sides of their heads, and it's a really neat reminder of how hardcore shit gets in this universe. It's interesting how Cyberpunk's world contrasts with Eidos Montreal's take on transhumanism with their Deus Ex games. Here, augmentation is fashionable, accepted, and normal. In Deus Ex, augmentation creates a societal and class divide since augmented people need regular access to medication, or their bodies will begin to reject their augmentations. Well, and then a global cyberpsychosis causes the augmented to dive into a collective murderous rampage, so that's kind of a big deal. I guess what I'm trying to say is, play games in the nth review release order. Still, cyberware in this society is a bit of a Calvinist mark of the beast, a necessity for commerce and participation in society, and not everyone's happy about it. One of the Ripper docs you encounter is a bigot. He's adamantly anti-augmentation, but he'll install whatever you want for profit anyway. Then there are other, more savage individuals out for profit too. Some of the game's most gruesome villains are the Scavs, groups that kidnap cybernetically enhanced individuals and violently rip their chrome from them, leaving their eviscerated, gruesome remains in their dark hideouts. But it goes deeper. Mental cyber hardware can literally turn people into avatars for other people. Yes, in Cyberpunk, it's possible to become a meat robot for someone else's brain. And it's a selling point here. Dolls are escorts that work in dollhouses that become inhabited by a different virtual personality to facilitate dates and establish superficial emotional connections. Once the date is over, the doll's memory is wiped of the instance. In one quest, you take some pills and let your pal Johnny Silverhand take control of your body for a hangover-esque night out that you have little agency over. Then we get to the deep stuff, to the idea of a soul, of manipulating the mind directly, of losing control of your very being. The game plays in dream logic, that the narrative is unreliable, and what you've known up to some point can be changed to become something new and strange. One of my favorite quests in this game, or any game, is Dream On, the final quest of the Jefferson Perales for Mayor plotline. Perales invites you back to his ritzy penthouse apartment for an investigation after he discovered an unknown person in his hallway in the middle of the night, shot at them, and then spontaneously lost consciousness himself. After a thorough search and testimony from his wife Elizabeth, you discover that both of their physical brains are being manipulated by an unknown party in their own home, changing and deleting memories and attitudes along the way. You come across a closet full of equipment being used for this that Elizabeth has forgotten about entirely. As she admits that her husband's memories and temperament have been changing in the past few months, they both start asking questions about their own motivations. When did Jefferson decide to run for mayor? And why? Does he even remember? If you warn Jefferson of the manipulation, will he even remember the conversation before his brain is altered further? The fact that you can't find the perpetrators of this scheme despite your efforts to track them down stings even more when you get separate texts from the couple that they have to cut off all communication with you immediately, the result of even further changes by their shadowy, unknown manipulators. And that's it. If you watch the in-world TV, you see that Jefferson wound up winning the election. Cyberpunk's main quest revolves around Soul Killer, a technological process pioneered by netrunner Alt Cunningham that allows a mind, and therefore a person's soul, to be transferred entirely into a machine, or at least a copy of it. It works similarly to Star Trek's teleporter technology. You're scanned at a precise moment in time and then destroyed, replicated into a virtual environment. The idea of Soul Killer is both interesting and terrifying, that your consciousness, your very being, is being uploaded to a cold machine with all the pain involved in the process.
Alt, before you leave, we gotta talk. Just you and me.
No, that will not be possible.
This is what happens to Johnny Silverhand when Arasaka, who owns the Soul Killer technology, captures him after he nukes their headquarters. Then there are the limitations of storing your consciousness in a digital file, or engram, and what happens when the Soul Killer scan isn't the highest fidelity. You get an opportunity near the end of the main quest to interact with Jackie's engram, who Arasaka scanned in an attempt to interrogate him after the Konpeki Plaza heist. Unfortunately, the scan came too long after his death, and the Jackie you encounter is incomplete, rattling off information incoherently with sparks of emotion, unable to comprehend or render realistic answers to your questions. And then, even with the highest fidelity scans, how well do human brains hold on to memories anyway? You get to encounter Alt Cunningham herself, or at least a metal-cold interpretation of her, who informs you that even as you've played through Johnny's memories and have the utmost faith in their accuracy, they're still subjective accounts of what actually happened. They can't be used exclusively to make accurate judgments. In your unique circumstances as V, you get to experience what it's like to give an engram agency in the real world again. Johnny lives in a biochip in your head, but he also pops up in so many places because he has direct access to your mind's eye and inner dialogue, which is why V doesn't need to talk to him in the physical world even if he appears there. He can even show up in brain dances, which are standalone software, just because he can inject himself into your vision. When you give him access to your body, his metallic arm even visually renders over yours. You get used to Johnny popping up anywhere for any reason, but my favorite example of this playful injection happens in Phantom Liberty, when you interact with So Me and her digital avatar Songbird as an undercover V, who's assuming another identity, all at the same time. It is absolutely magic.
No turning back now.
No, but we're in this together.
I am ready.
This world's reliance on cyberware to enhance your capabilities makes killing and dying feel more impactful here than in other immersive sims. In games like Deus Ex, System Shock, or Prey, these technological augmentations are more like superpowers than an integral part of your character or your key to society. When you take on work with the Voodoo Boys, their big guy Placide doesn't just assign you a task, he demands your personal link and uploads malware, essentially, into your brain so that he can surveil your every move. It's strangely intrusive. When you're out in the field, attacks like Synapse Burnout physically ignite cyberware, setting people on fire, and that's both effective and terrifying. Your ability to scan cyberware in the environment also augments your perception of other characters. They aren't just generic entities in a video game, but people that you can interact with. It's something that Watch Dogs once teased a decade ago with the passive random data it generated when you glanced at people. When I made the connection between the two games, it felt awesome to see a tech-enabled view of other people implemented here in a meaningful way, instead of just being a visual flourish. Of course, cyberware exposure seems to introduce people to a not zero probability of complete madness. And that's beyond effective mods like the Mr. Stud phallic enhancement that causes a guy to freaking explode below the belt in a gruesome way. Cyberpsychosis is a kind of mental health condition driven by cyberware that results in an insatiable lust for violence. They make for some interesting side quests that highlight all the different ways and settings that the disease can manifest. I'll have more to say about that as we dive into side content later on. Of course, with cyberware and cyber warfare and all kinds of other cyber stuff being embedded in this system, and netrunning being such an important trade, it makes sense that the game would substantiate a parallel digital universe to visit. Cyberspace visually plays on the notion that even the real world is being rendered by some cybernetic intermediate with its prevalent glitchiness. But inside the machines, that glitchiness, that haziness, gives cyberspace a kind of divine presentation. There's a lot said about how Rogue AIs and the Bartmoss Collective ruined the internet, and they had to rebuild it with a big wall to defend it, the Black Wall, which is administered by Netwatch. It's lore that resides deep in the game and doesn't do much with. It's a matter of fact more than an actual matter. How interesting would it have been if the game had replicated the chaotic void beyond the Black Wall, because major characters' trips in and around the Black Wall are central to the story campaigns. There are temples and corridors here, as well as memories, avatars, and the inside of data fortresses, but in a limited way. Unfortunately, cyberspace is only presented in brief pockets throughout the main quest. These segments are limited and linear, not just a literal abstraction, but a figurative one too. At no point can you hop into cyberspace to resolve more complex issues through a digital parallel space. Even the hacking minigame is a relatively static experience, although it's easy to believe it would be tiresome if you had to visit cyberspace and blast Geometry Wars foes to hack stuff. Still, it's not just that the game skimps on its opportunities to present it, but the elaborate Phantom Liberty expansion doesn't include it at all, even though there are other abstracted virtual spaces in there. But these are small digital potatoes, considering the expansiveness of the game elsewhere. Moving away from the brain and the person, brain dances are Cyberpunk's equivalent to movies and interactive experiences. You don't buy shiny discs and scan through menus, you snap on wraparound headsets that flash visions into your mind. These are first-person experiences, virtual reality, basically, but you're not here to watch linear entertainment. Brain dances are how V becomes Sherlock Holmes in this game. Snap into the editor mode and you get to become a detached camera, wandering around the scene that the brain dance records. You'll use these to find weaknesses and clues in the recorded environment to achieve your next objective, map a space out, etc. The game highlights where critical clues are, and that's fine, because it allows you to explore these dances organically rather than allowing them to devolve into pixel hunts. The unique experiences here can become particularly gruesome, in the form of those XBDs I mentioned earlier. This one allows you to witness, in first person, a netrunner being fried from the inside when being overloaded with neural workload outside of a cold box. It's unsettling in the best possible way, establishing how cruel the scavs are. Judy's test dance is a recording of a first-person bank robbery, but there are some truly horrible peddlers of these too, including this duo you need to retrieve a specific XBD reel from. You can see what new brain dances they've received, and the tags are so horrifying that I feel morally obligated to not show them. Brain dance hustlers like to hide out in shady alleys and serve as dealers for the darkest stuff you can ever get. You, even the most curious player, are spared the worst of it lest the game lose its M rating. Malicious actors in Cyberpunk can use brain dances for cybernetic harm too. They can induce cyberpsychosis. They can scam you into becoming meat for scavs. Someone will leave one in a trash can to give you an Endrunners anime segment that kicks off another small quest line. Brain dances as a vector for malware is so fucking interesting to think about. Imagine you're watching one and suddenly, your stomach doesn't work anymore. But what about the brains that don't have humans? AIs have been largely banned in Cyberpunk, but not entirely. Remember cabs? In a setup that's both incredibly 1980s and relevant today, Delamain is an artificial intelligence that runs a fleet of autonomous cabs. And it can think. Take a Delamain cab and it'll start asking you about personhood and humanity in the way that Data does in Star Trek The Next Generation. You're introduced to Delamain's premier Excelsior service early on in the main quest when Dex sends you off to Konpeki Plaza. Later on, one of their rogue AI cabs rams you randomly, and you're asked to come down to HQ to help them resolve the issue. It turns out that a series of rogue cabs have emerged, cutting their cords with the mothership having developed their own uniquely agitated personality. One of them is so close to GLaDOS from Portal that it's clear that they probably had to go to Valve and get permission. Like tests and cake and everything.
Delamain misses you. I'm here to shut you down.
Your specimen has been processed, and we are now ready to begin the test proper.
Another is about to drive off a cliff and you have to talk them down. Yet another is extremely anxious and you have to drive them very carefully in the city, stopping to take a break. Eventually you reunite all of them with the mothership AI who corrupt it. Then you have to decide, if you have the skill, whether to reset Delamain to a default state or let all its various entities consolidate into a new one. And who's there to nudge you in a direction? Well, it's none other than your new partner in crime.
Oh, hey there. Meow. It's been a couple of catnaps since I've slinked in here to talk to you about the Nth Review Patreon. I'm Captain Kirby Jack Raven, and I want to let you know my dad works really hard on these reviews, and he's so glad that you enjoy them. Of course, he doesn't get to make as many as he'd like, even though he has a list of games he'd really like to do, because he's got to work all day long doing a bajillion different things that aren't Nth Reviews to make sure that I can eat. Do you know how hungry I get? Do you? You could absolutely help my dad out and guarantee more, faster released Nth Reviews if you subscribe to the Nth Review Patreon. For just $3 a month, you get access to monthly Q&As plus early access to new content plus some other exclusive stuff from time to time. For just $5 a month, you can even contribute questions to the monthly Q&As and get your name listed in the credits. It's pretty cool. What's that? You're ready to subscribe today? Well, you better rush on over to patreon.com/the Nth Review to do just that. What's that address again? Why, it's patreon.com/the Nth Review. Don't forget to visit patreon.com/the Nth Review and subscribe today. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to whatever it was I was doing. Toodles.
We're out front, Bug.
Member, reservations in your name, Ramon. You're there to meet Hajime Taki, Military Tech Department rep.
Welcome to
Papers are for the
Konpeki
Flathead.
Don't worry. Got this.
So, Konpeki Plaza. It's probably my favorite heist in any video game. You've been doing jobs as a newly independent merc and living the life, but Jackie's got his eyes on something big. Dexter Deshawn wants a biochip that Arasaka's corporate prince has, Yorinobu Arasaka. Dexter knows about it because Evelyn Parker does. She's a doll escort hired by the Voodoo Boys to get it. Now Dexter and Evelyn are going to try and sell it to Netwatch, who maintain the black-walled internet. There's more story here, but it just gets more complicated from there. You're enlisted to pull off the heist, and you're gonna get an incredible share of the take, more than Dex's usual rate. Did you get all that? It's okay if you didn't, because I definitely didn't until I started reading up on it afterward. Some would call it bad storytelling, but I just kinda like the haziness of the plot, or the game's multiple plots, with the world's actors coming in and out. That overwhelmingness and periphery detail that I talked about earlier is something that I enjoyed a lot. Anyway, things at Konpeki go pear-shaped immediately after you nab the biochip. Security is after you, rupturing the biochip case, so Jackie tucks the chip in his head. When Jackie succumbs to his wounds, you now have to play host to the chip. With all the noise that you drummed up, Dex waves you over to a shady hotel and has you whacked out of fear. But look what happens next. The biochip brings you back to life, and Johnny's engram is on there. His living presence penetrates your world. The game is now about how you take care of the invasive Johnny before his engram overrides your personality, your soul, and you, V, disappear entirely. Your introduction to rocker boy / terrorist Johnny Silverhand is freaking rad. You push through your way backstage at a venue to a microphone, standing before a raving crowd. This is a flashback to the distant year of 2023. Soon enough, he's riding a helicopter, mowing down Arasaka goons and nuking their corporate tower. They don't like this much, so they capture him, execute Soul Killer, and turn him into an engram. That engram eventually winds up on an experimental biochip, the one you steal as V, the one that's now in your head. Through these flashbacks and one-on-one conversations in the future of 2077, you get glimpses of his life as a rocker, the fans who collect his music, the tour posters, and more. You get to play through his memories as him, feeling like a badass as you blow up Arasaka employees with his high-caliber pistol, engaging with the fairer sex, etc. V revives in a junkyard, somehow, followed by an action sequence that brings you back to Vic, your Ripper Doc, who gives you the bad news about your brain, and how you only have a few weeks left before Johnny takes over your very consciousness. Neither you nor Johnny are happy about this new arrangement. The premise of sharing your mental space and perception with someone who is uncomfortable with your existence was pretty terrifying initially, but Johnny softens, and as the story advances, you can truly become friends. But, not in a huggy, bumping fists kind of way, more of an idealistic one. Johnny's not just there for the main quest where you're hoping to remove him from your brain. He weaves through the side gigs too. He's just there on the side as a companion, randomly. He's not shy about playing devil's advocate or offering his contrarian opinion, one you may actually agree with depending on your style.
Lovely neighborhood. Mwah.
But he also helps during investigations or makes observations during quests that you may not have noticed otherwise. And then he's got war stories for days too.
Why are you giving me these?
Imagine we're deployed together, fighting in a war, side by side.
As the main quest progresses and your relic errors seem to get more severe, you gradually lose your consciousness and question how much is being done under your power and how much is being done under Johnny's. You'll come to in random locations after passing out, and he'll be hovering over you, letting you know what you missed. As these become more severe, it nails a feeling of desperation to figure out how to save your very consciousness from being overwritten, your very being. Your relationship is kept at a steady keel, and over time, different aspects of his character are unveiled to you. His acerbic nature covers the fact that he can and will be a dick to you for no reason at any time.
You fucking blow if you can. Not about to leave her alone, middle of nowhere.
No, I can't talk to you when you get this. Sentimental. Waste of words. At least take a nap so we don't have to argue.
But there are moments where it feels like the relationship moves forward, and times where it moves backward, based on the scripting of the language. You have an affinity rating in the character menu that I didn't understand, and didn't feel it was communicated effectively. In reality, building your relationship with him unlocks a separate secret ending that I wouldn't have picked anyway. But there comes a time where you get to see the physical evidence of his legacy, and how it impacted Night City. The Arasaka Tower Memorial, set into the ground next to its geometrically dominating successor, is a grandiose monument to a terrible act of terrorism that you recreate in first person through his memories. In contrast, his grave is an unmarked mud pit on the outskirts of town.
What did you expect? Headstone, flag, and flowers?
No, I don't know. A marker. Something. Anything.
I grew up with Keanu Reeves in his earliest role as Ted Theodore Logan, one half of the time-traveling band Wild Stallions in the Bill and Ted movies. He excels at goofy stoner figures, and while he's had more than a few stilted performances, he's made his biggest paychecks as stoic anti-heroes that don't really need to express their humanity that often, which kind of plays to his strengths. When he showed up on stage at Microsoft's E3 2019 conference to slog through the announcement of his own casting in the game, it was interesting.
I gotta talk to you about something. We gotta talk to you about something. CD Projekt Red.
He was living high on the success of John Wick, so I think we all kind of wondered, would his Johnny Silverhand just be more of that? Reeves portrays Silverhand with a brusqueness that underlines how idealistic and stubborn he is. He illuminates how hardline someone would have to be to bring a nuclear bomb to a corporate tower and set it off. He can be sinister and unlikable, but also plausibly relatable at the same time. Somehow, someway, it skipped my mind that Keanu Reeves was the protagonist of The Matrix, a single movie that explores the nature of an elaborate digital environment designed to mask a horrible real world. In it, the person and their mind are separated from the nerves and senses of their own body, replaced by a virtual intermediate. That sounds like Cyberpunk 1999 to me. Despite how he was used in the game's promotion, Reeves isn't just stunt casting in Cyberpunk 2077. He doesn't just show up for a few minutes and then bounce. The game weaves him in and out of so much of what you do. He's everywhere in this game. You think he's just showing up for the marquee events, but you'll find him pop up and say a couple lines in a relatively small event or in a random location. The sheer quantity of Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand in here really sells the illusion that he's in your head. Keanu Reeves got to send CD Projekt plenty of billable hours for this. Unfortunately, as I touched on earlier, this vast amount of Keanu content doesn't allow him to grow as a character until you progress down the main storyline, because that's the only way the game can justify cementing your progress and his growth as a character. Of course, in the same way that the storytelling is a bit hazy, his constant war with Arasaka seems more philosophical than practical. I was never quite sold on how he would get so incensed with Arasaka, even before he uncovered what happened with Alt Cunningham, that would guide him towards infiltrating and then nuke Arasaka Tower. And yeah, I get there's a mountain of lore to buttress all this throughout and outside the game too. But if the story is going to reach a conclusion, you have to do something about Johnny Silverhand before he kills you. He goes or you go. So you may be wondering, as I did, if there is a compromise where you both get to live. This debacle is filtered through the main quest, which is a dramatic tale about the dynastic family leadership and intergenerational rivalry at the top of the Arasaka Corporation. With the help of Saburo's once bodyguard, Takamura, V becomes an integral tool to resolve Arasaka's problems after Yorinobu murders his father. The main questline isn't a long one if you focus on it as closely as possible, but through the game's splintering of characters and storylines, you're offered so many different ways to save your soul that it feels like a grander, open-ended journey. Unfortunately, many of these hopes and dreams are merely that at best, or outright manipulation at worst. V is truly in one hell of a pickle with this Johnny Silverhand situation. With how I played Cyberpunk, only one ending seemed apparent to steer V's fate. The devil. Even though I explored what other endings did after the fact, this is the one I ultimately went with, the one that felt the most relatable, even if it might not be the quote-unquote best one or happiest one. Of course, that line of thinking suggests that the happiest ending is typically the most favorable one, a phenomenon in any media, something we'll explore later with Phantom Liberty. Here, I sided with Hanako Arasaka, who promises a cure for what ails me in exchange for helping her depose her brother and resurrect her father, who is now his own digital engram. Apparently, Arasaka is able to use Soul Killer on living people to back up their, souls, and Saburo planned on that. In fact, the biochip in your head was a prototype of a technology that allows an engram like Saburo's to take over an existing living consciousness. Does that sound vaguely familiar to you? I fought through Arasaka Tower, through Yorinobu's chief of security, Atom Smasher, to Yorinobu himself, satisfying my end of the bargain. Johnny, who fought hard against Arasaka in the end, is disappointed you'd side with them in exchange for your own life. He walks off into some kind of virtual death. You experience a bit of that yourself as you awaken in their orbiting hospital after Johnny's engram was successfully cleaved from yours. Through a series of hellishly tedious tests administered by a doctor who completely lacks empathy, you're told that as a result of the procedure, you have 6 months to live in your current flesh and blood form due to the damage from the engram. Alternatively, you can surrender the rights to your consciousness to this megacorporation on a temporary basis, of course, to exist in a digital domain indefinitely, perhaps in perpetuity. I chose the former option, which gracefully dumped me back into Night City after a half-hour-long credit roll to a point just before the point of no return that kicks off the end of the campaign. Bear in mind, I hadn't completed a number of the other characters' quest lines by the time I went to zip up the main quest, which would have opened up more options for endings. I don't feel like my experience is less as a result, but being able to return to Night City to see them through certainly opened the door to keep me going. Playing through Phantom Liberty provided me an extended outro that heightened the drama of my choices even further, but there's a lot more people in this world than you and Mr. Silverhand.
You asshole! You dirt-eating, no-good bastard son of a bitch! Stop right there!
Something that you've probably appreciated through this review so far is the huge cast of interesting characters that Cyberpunk employs, and how well they're rendered here. Their models are detailed, the animations are convincing, the dialogue is believable, and the immersive first-person camera makes engaging with this large group of people work. And it's not just Johnny who gets the golden brush, it's the second and third tier characters in this world as well, although hair gets a little jiggly and weird at times. Facial animations are driven by automation middleware, which is interesting because it produces authentic results without requiring CD Projekt to capture and store however many hundreds of hours of facial animations. There's some slang here that you have to get used to. Hackers are net runners, pals are chooms, otherwise they're probably gonks. It's not as sophisticated as the belter tongue of The Expanse, but it does expand the lens further to make this world feel just a little bit bigger. The men of this game also have this weird, big, stompy walk that I noticed. Not quite sure what that is. Some people have issues with Cyberpunk's sometimes bawdy and occasionally otherwise crude dialogue, but it's a mature game. Come on now. Where it was supposed to be a little campy, it was. It's quite a few notches above the information kiosks that characters were made into in Starfield, or sometimes in its better predecessor, The Outer Worlds. Cyberpunk's conversations are plausible and interesting, which lends to its more visceral moments. There are also fun quirks in here. There's plenty of dialogue that isn't English, and for those who are speaking another language entirely, the subtitles would translate them. But for the moments that people slip in words from other native languages, the subtitles cause them to glow, but don't translate them. For a few hours, I thought I was missing a button prompt to translate them when they popped up, but I guess I'll have to figure out what they mean through context. Dialogue will also overlap, which is how it happens in the real world. People often don't wait for people to deliver a complete sentence before replying. Not that most people deliver a complete sentence ever. Seriously, read a transcript of any conversation you've ever had. It's scattered, weird, and full of plenty of filler. But sometimes the overlap that happens seems accidental and wrong, the result of some dynamic misunderstanding of how the conversation was supposed to work. One convenient feature that I only really used because the game tended to crash is the game's easy ability to skip through dialogue. It's not just helpful, with the game's fast-forward distortion, it looks cool too. As you chat with people and work through quests, you'll have plenty of opportunities to perform skill checks based on your 5 primary skills and your introductory background. While many of the checks based on actual skills seem to affect the outcome of your quest or provide alternative options than what the quest giver provides, the skill checks based on your background seem a bit more ambiguous. My corpo background allowed me to provide responses based on experience, but it was hard to see if this actually affected outcomes or just made me sound smarter.
My childhood? Let's see.
Several restarts indicated that some of these dialogue choices were just alternate takes to get to the next note in the conversation. Likewise, there are several moments where you'll have time-sensitive response windows, and it never felt clear how those affect outcomes either. The pressure to react before the meter ran out forced me to make a decision when it seemed that making no decision at all was probably a valid option too. It's the past, the present, and the future in Cyberpunk, so you have a phone, which allows you to talk to a growing number of contacts as you play the game. Calls pop up with a virtualized avatar of that person that looks like something from Apple Vision Pro or StarCraft. Either way, if you decline to take their call when they ring you, they'll get dumped to text message, which is actually pretty neat. Speaking of which, text messaging in this game is integrated really well. You'll get a text message and you'll sometimes have dialogue options to respond with. It'll ... for a bit as they virtually type out an answer, as if there's a virtual person on the other side. Replies are a bit fast though, unrealistically fast. It's not just fast in the conversations themselves, where blocks of text are popping up mere seconds after you message them back, but you'll get texts explaining an event or series of events immediately after something you did, when they could have plausibly waited a few days to deliver the news. You'll even get texts from people as you're walking out of a building with them at the end of a quest. To facilitate different subjects and quests, the game will splinter your conversations with the same person rather than dump it all into one conversation stream. Intuitively, it would make more sense to do it in one stream, but then you could lose track of other things they said or requests to start storylines amidst other subjects. The thing is, you can already lose that information. If that information was lost, the character could have just asked again, in the same way that V will automatically ask to continue a conversation or the other person left off when you're interrupted by something. But maybe my favorite part of how Cyberpunk treats other people are the relationship options. Romance in this game didn't feel like an option that you needed to DDR pad your way to get started. It felt like a natural extension of what the game was already letting you do and how it was written. My character began dating the nomad Pan Am, a romance that was built over the course of my questline with her, culminating in a very intimate encounter inside a giant tank, of all places. The romance seemed to plateau afterward immediately though. You'll get to initiate dates, but you can only have exactly one kind of date with her at your apartment with the same trio of conversational topics that are relevant to the events during the last mission of their questline. There are the same handful of other romantic options, and then you can go to bed or leave. Going to bed does not mean naughty stuff. She just announces she's tired and you fade to black, waking up to see her in bed. Even if you own multiple apartments, the dates are the same. The random texts that she sends, whether it's advice about what to do about something or other more romantic things, feel more realistic in terms of relationship building. But that's only a finite amount of content. Whether you're seeking romantic relationships with other characters or not, it's great to get random texts from people giving you updates on their life or what they're doing. The game will often feed you a few random texts from people following up, and it's a great personal touch that adds even more depth to these characters. A game that's a lot like Grand Theft Auto requires some of the quirky stuff that an open worlder has, namely the randomized world-filling population that doesn't make the game feel lifeless if you squint your eyes. Even if the crowd dynamics have improved since release, these people still don't make much sense. People exist in various group sizes, day or night, sensically or not, but the world is full of them. Police and the gangs are out and about all the time, and there's some random firefight you can engage with on every other block. But it's the random people of this world that highlight where the game does give light and design. I understand the plight of the people I interact with, good and bad, which motivates me to do work for them, with them, or against them, without it feeling like I'm just checking tasks off a list. When NPCs reach out, when they talk or text, when they have tasks, it feels like virtual entities are doing it, and it's not just a hidden script popping up stuff like a player piano, and that helps give the game life. The randoms on the street, not so much. But then, who the hell are you? You are V. Who is V? Well, it's whoever you sculpt them to be. You invest time and energy up front to roll your character, and if you screw up here, you can change it later on by visiting a Ripper dock or activate a respec, thankfully. You have so many visual options, from the usual face sculpting options to which genitals you have and how big they are. There's a lot of nudity in this game. There was a lot of pushback against CD Projekt about how non-inclusive and misrepresentative the game is in regards to transgender and non-binary individuals, but far more qualified people than me have explored this issue. There's so much gorgeous, fashionable clothing in here too. The effectiveness doesn't feel very apparent, which almost made me vouch for an all-nude run, considering no one in the game seems to complain about it. Certainly no one did after my dates with Pan Am left me without my clothes, despite the interstitial cutscene indicating otherwise. You can go without shoes and the game will replicate your barefoot pitter-patter. I often found myself disassembling or selling so much of what I found though, like so much of the loot in this game. You level up in Cyberpunk by doing so many different things, from killing people to hacking to completing quests and more. Leveling up allows you to fill 5 talent trees with points to add skills and abilities. The 6th tree, the Relic, is a smaller one that unlocks as you begin Phantom Liberty. As you reach higher branches of these talent trees, they serve as stronger skill checks and conversations, or even your ability to bust down a back door of an outlaw stronghold when your hacking and diplomacy won't work otherwise. There always felt like some philosophical overlap between trees, so there were many small searches as I leveled up throughout the game to find particular skills when it seemed like they could appear on a few different trees. And then once you access a Ripper dock, of which there are several around town, you can install and upgrade your cyberware. Like Deus Ex's augmentations, your body's various systems can be outfitted with cybertech. The implementation here makes that series' mechanics look really simple in comparison. Your game will fundamentally change based on which cyberware you install. Some modules allow for double jumps. Others remove your block of quick hacks so you can be a lot better at blades or whatever. Using components scored from successful hacks and breaking down other stuff, you can upgrade cyberware piece by piece. Like Deus Ex, none of this can be altered without visiting a Ripper dock, so if you're deep into a quest and you spec'd wrong, you're going to have to deal with it, or hope that you have a good save point from before the mission locks you off. You've crafted a character, at least started to. Now it's time to actually engage the world. How do you do it? The first tool in your box is probably combat. Fans of flying numbers when you shoot people will feel right at home here, especially as your character skills up to inflict more and specific kinds of damage. Duking dudes with guns feels tight and responsive. It's an absolute joy. Weapons come in 12 tiers that become available as the game progresses and you level up. It allows at a glance the ability to weigh one weapon versus another. When comparing individual numbers is a bit much sometimes, even with the comparison panel enabled. Among firearms, you'll find the usual classes of automatic weapons, shotguns, pistols, and whatever, but also weird stuff like this AI gun that has commentary about stuff.
Still got all your functions?
Running system diagnostics. Testing will take approximately 47 seconds. Bum, bum, be-dum, bum, bum.
What are you doing?
Guns can have slots for modifications, some of which come with a few installed, while non-iconic weaponry can be broken down into parts for crafting upgrades or other stuff entirely. In combat, you have recharging healing items and grenades. You don't need to micromanage quantities, although how many you have available will depend on cyberware or whatever. All you need to do in combat is wait for them to recharge. That can be difficult to deal with in the midst of an intense battle, though. It does also put you on your toes about what kind of grenades to equip, because they dole out different kinds of elemental damage. You can duck, cover, and peek around corners. The environment can chip away slower or faster around you depending on the materials. The violence is visceral. Limbs and heads explode with purpose, or just explode. Of course, this is augmented if you decide to sink into the melee weapons. Now, I've only watched a few reviews of Cyberpunk post 2.0 release, but each of them gushed about the improvements to the melee system and how potentially OP they may be. Of course, to get to that point, you need to invest in a number of skills, whereas firearms mastery is pretty accessible from the get-go, with mechanics similar to what you're familiar with in other games. As you play the game and develop your blade skills, you'll experience melee in boxing and blades format. Boxing is intimate. Blades are faster and place you against gun-wielding opponents. From the tutorial, I never quite got used to melee. Dodging required precision timing, and I never quite got used to parrying properly until I had to take down a cyber psycho using a blade weapon. But then I was missing too many other vital blade skills to want to keep using it. What are those other skills? That's a fantastic question. One is the ability to direct fired bullets toward any target your cursor hovers over, so long as you have stamina. Strangely, enemies will keep firing at you even when you're clearly murdering all their coworkers by deflecting their bullets back at them. Then you can replace that wimpy little dodge with a dash, allowing you to displace yourself like a Jedi dodging a droideka. Then there are finishers that allow you to just slice someone to bits with a button press. There are lots more additions here and there, plus your ability to add more stamina as you level. But holistically, it makes blades an incredibly attractive set of weapons once you get the hang of them. It makes me wish I'd started buying those skills earlier on. Then there's hacking, which comes in two flavors. Nearly all of your hacking is quick hacking, in which you enter a scanner mode called Kuroshi, named after the implants that Vic gives you, which allows you to perform context-sensitive hacks on objects and people. Want to see through a camera, want someone's grenade to detonate on their person, want to reprogram turrets to attack enemies you've tagged. These are your magical spells, the pace of which are dictated by the quantity and recharging ability of your character's mana bar. RAM. You can take control of a camera to gain a new perspective through which you can deploy quick hacks remotely. If you've played games like 2012 Syndicate, and no you haven't, or the Watch Dogs games, you'll get the swing of this pretty quickly. It's really interesting to kill someone remotely through a camera, but it's not as interesting when their companion just sits there on the couch nearby, not reacting at all. One of my favorite remote commands, and it's not technically a quick hack, is to manually take control of turrets and use them to mow down your enemies. Using the scanner mode, you can also check the environment for forensic clues in a quest, just like the brain dances. It's not a new mechanic, but it does open opportunities, like being able to chase the digital ghost of a van across the wasteland. But like the rest of your cyberware, the only place you can alter which weaponized quick hacks you have on hand are with Ripper Docs. There were several moments where I realized I was woefully equipped in terms of offensive hacking abilities and was far too deep into a mission to change them, so I was stuck with the puny ones I had, even if they'd served me well until that very moment. Not helping things, finding the menu to equip them is a bit of a nightmare if you aren't regularly tweaking it. Beyond your real-time, moment-to-moment quick hacks are the more conventional hacks, the second, longer kind. Throughout the world, you'll find more conventional hacking terminals, and you may think these are setting you up to alter something in the environment or open doors or whatever, but usually not. Instead, they're usually just dispensaries for crafting materials, brought to you by a new minigame in which you attempt to hop from rows to columns trying to lock the next hex segment in one of the provided segments. It's interesting mechanically, but I never really felt the reward for achieving lesser or greater objectives except that I would get more cash and resources. And then there's stealth. Here in Cyberpunk, clicking into stealth mode feels effective in the close quarter spaces you have thanks to effective cover systems and chest-high walls. Similar to other modern stealth games, your enemies have individual threat meters, so you know who's about to catch on to your presence or how long someone's being distracted by something you've activated. You can sneak up behind enemies and subdue them violently or not, but if you hold on to them too long, they'll break free and suddenly you have a loud physical alarm going off in your hands. But this sort of highlights the fragility of the game's stealth. Party balloon design. Once you pop your cover once, everyone in the immediate area, which is usually the entire stronghold or lair you're infiltrating, is ready to hop on top of you until you wipe them out or they wipe you out. It's not unique to Cyberpunk, but it is absolutely frustrating to put in a best effort to mind your stealthy P's and Q's, and one small, stupid thing will shatter your entire effort and you can't mend it. Effectively using stealth highlights the game's old-as-day gameplay in which enemies wander between a pair of predetermined nodes in timed intervals. Success requires waiting around a corner and watching as the enemies you've hopefully tagged move back and forth. Failing these simple hierarchies of tasks, moving too soon, leaving a dead body out, whatever, was the only reason I ever felt compelled to save scum in this game. You might think you have an out with your hacking abilities and would love to just hide in a corner unseen and access systems or people remotely, but that would be too easy. The game's got to check on that by giving enemies the ability to trace your attacks back to you, inevitably uncovering your existence and setting off alarms. Similarly, once spotted, you can be hacked with many of the digital attacks that you can inflict on others, which is an interesting experience. As enemies attempt to attack you this way, a line will trace from you back to the attacker and anyone along the way who has a line of sight. Killing either party will interrupt the hack, which is actually really neat. But of course, how can you possibly have a Grand Theft Auto-esque open worlder without driving? There's plenty of good reasons to grab a car and use it to move around Night City, because the game doesn't offer much in the way of multimodal transport options beyond fast travel points. Fast traveling lures you into bus stops and subway stations, but they just open a map. There are no buses or subway trains, which seems antithetical to a big Californian city like this. The physics are a little floaty and weird sometimes in a way that seems playful like GTA's, but a little less refined. Riding a motorcycle most of the time and being able to smack corners or roll over obstacles with weird unrealistic physics instead of being automatically ejected each and every time was a big relief. And don't worry, you can still be tossed from your bike. You can steal vehicles, but that almost seems like work compared to summoning one from your D-pad's quick access menu in which it just rolls up to you, at least most of the time. I understand that this is a callback to your ability to summon Roach, your horse, in The Witcher 3. The game tosses you some rides as the story progresses, but you can hit up a terminal and buy them too. They're sorted by brand, as if that means much of anything. Like GTA, you'll have conversations en route to destinations, but unlike those games, they don't seem to be needlessly mapped to the length of the voyage between 2 points. GTA uses this to justify overly long, silly, even vulgar conversations to fill the time during longer drives as a kind of character development in name only. In Cyberpunk, you'll have quest-oriented conversations, and they can be over in a couple blocks. Then you can skip to the end of the pre-programmed ride, or you can sit there in silence and just let it all soak in. But you'll probably just skip it. Something Cyberpunk doesn't seem to improve on much over its peers is vehicular combat, which remains an Olympic sport of eye-hand coordination. Driving takes one particular set of skills, but pivoting the camera and pressing yet another button to open fire on a nearby opponent requires another set of skills. The game tasks me with this early on against a trio of cars full of enemies, and it was absolutely brutal. Some vehicles you pick up are already weaponized, merely requiring you to point them at the enemy you want to kaboom, and then doing so, Interstate 76 style. Yes, this is a groove champion house. The rest of the time, you're still patting your head and rubbing your belly, hoping you don't run into someone in the process or pin yourself in a corner accidentally. This is a role-playing game and a bit of an immersive sim, so much of what you do involves picking up stuff from the environment and then doing stuff with it. There's tons of loot out in the world among its many detailed spaces, but the useful stuff is what you pick up off the people you've brutally murdered. And there's so much crap in this world. Parsing my own inventory was a bit of a pain in the butt since I didn't engage with the single time use stuff that provides temporary stats bonuses or a lot of the weapon mods or the clothing or whatever. Before long, your inventory becomes a big grid of icons of questionable value. Like, literally questionable. You'll be asking yourself what any individual item is or why you're holding on to it. You can even carry around stuff that's literally classified as junk on top of the stuff that's questionably junk. Unintentionally uncumbering yourself and reducing your walking speed to a crawl by grabbing one item too many is one of the most common irritating things from this genre, but it does force you to visit your hoarded pile of crap periodically to clean it out. Even with options to stash items away in my apartment or personal vehicle, I was always inclined to sell it or break it down into crafting materials instead. You can buy stuff from specific merchants around the world, highlighted with icons all over the place, but you can sell stuff virtually anywhere. It's as if clearing your inventory is akin to scraping off leftovers into the nearest trash bin. What all these tools and minute-to-minute systems boil down to is the stronghold, which is the typical small-scale playground this game sets up for you to use all these skills at once or as you see fit. You approach these individual bars, warehouses, apartments, and more to take out a specific person, steal data, or perform another simple task. Depending on your playstyle, there's a way in or an alternate way to achieve a solution, which plays up the immersive simness of the game, like a more sophisticated Ubisoft game or a more scenario-oriented Deus Ex. I played Cyberpunk on hard, which is something special for me, because not only is it the prescribed difficulty, but it taught me that victory and advancement fell to properly playing the game, rather than overcoming the odds with twitchier gameplay or min-max character builds. Whether I was able to pull off stealth successfully or things went pear-shaped, I never felt like I was taking down these strongholds the wrong way, something that would have ruined an outcome in a lot of other immersive sims. The game organically removes the need to save scum for optimal outcomes. Being able to have happy accidents and move on in this game is great. Someone might be mad at you because your work wasn't as clean, but you don't need to stop your role entirely. It's freeing. Unlike an immersive sim and more like, say, the strongholds of Watch Dogs or Far Cry, knocking over these strongholds are more self-contained events than things that shape the world. By removing the penalty from playing a situation wrong, you also remove a bit of the benefit of playing it right. Completing more of these quests doesn't shape the fabric of the city, it doesn't grant you more territory, it doesn't change the dynamics of the game's multiple factions, etc. They're amazing moment to moment, mission to mission, but the reward is more strongholds to conquer as your street cred goes up, and not much more than that. Considering how much fun I had with them, that's actually okay in my book. In my view, it even highlights the notion that you're barely making a dent in this huge-ass society despite your outsized heroic deeds. It's kind of a relief to not be the superhero at the end of the story. But then there are standalone events that do shape the world a bit. Compelling boss design is difficult, even in simple games like Mario, where you need to challenge players with new mechanics or different reasons to struggle. When it comes to boss design, Cyberpunk takes the path of other immersive sims by presenting a big bad boss with a huge health bar and ads, rather than open world games like GTA or Saints Row, which seem to lean on spectacular cinematic set pieces with bespoke gameplay. The problem this usually creates in immersive sims like Deus Ex and now Cyberpunk is that you typically have options in how you tackle a challenge. Immersive sims are all about playing the game as you see fit rather than conforming to what the game requires of the player. But here, boss battles compress all of your powers and abilities into a very tight time frame as bosses stomp around trying to murder you. To be fair to Cyberpunk, the game teaches the player that relying on any particular tool in a firefight usually ends up in a quick death. You have to juggle your tools effectively. You can have the best guns, but you still need to control crowds with your grenades. You still need to use your quick hacks. The game gives you all these tools and it commands you to use them all in the same way a much simpler game would require to use a combination of light and heavy attacks. While a combination of stealth, combat, and hacking is amazing when you have complete control during a warehouse infiltration that you can largely set the pace to, the scenario changes when you're having to punch all three of those buttons at once, very quickly, when a bullet-sponging boss shows up. And because this is a video game, you know you're probably headed into one of these confrontations when you find a large ammo cache in what seems to be the antechamber of a quest's final objective. Many of Cyberpunk's bosses are typically mini-bosses in the form of cyber psychos, something we'll get back to, and those are typically enjoyable. But to pick apart my issues with this game's bosses, I want to highlight some of my specific confrontations. My least favorite boss in Cyberpunk might be Oda, who is Hanako Arasaka's bodyguard and an apprentice of Takamura. Going in, I wasn't properly equipped with quick hacks, so I didn't have a very effective cyber magic against him. When you've whittled his health down enough, he will cloak and heal in one of several locations in the combat arena. If you don't find him quick enough, you can effectively lose all of your progress. I fought Oda over and over again to the point where I completely ran out of ammo for all my weapons, and he easily recharged back to full health. An honorable mention for worst boss is Phantom Liberty's Kurt Hansen. I had him down to 3% health after a struggle, and no amount of katana hits nor an overheat quick hack, which had worked before, could shrink his health further because he had become immune to those kinds of damage arbitrarily. Instead, I had to die and start all over again. I eventually won by pulling out a big gun and shooting his head a lot. Yay. My favorite boss battle might be Atom Smasher, the final challenge of the main campaign. For about an hour and a half, I struggled. I got him down to 32% health before I overextended myself, and his splashy pistol fire from mid-arena took care of me. So I slept on it, and after cracking my knuckles, beat him on the first try. Bringing him down to 50% health opened a bank of additional guard fodder and a pair of turrets. I took out the guards, and then hacked the turrets in my favor, which drained his health dramatically. But honestly, my favorite boss battles were the ones I got to cheese. The only way I could have realistically beaten Oda was to restart the entire mission with a new bank of quick hacks and upgraded cyberware after visiting a Ripper dock. Dying over and over again trying to legitimately beat him with the powers I had was a fool's errand. Instead, Oda glitched on the edge of a platform and I was able to do incredible damage to him from the far side of the room with my sniper rifle. In another fight in an abandoned mall, I took out boss Matilda K. Rose, the Sasquatch, when she glitched in place. In either case, I moved on afterward and felt great. Long, tedious boss battles suck. I don't know who truly digs them, but there you go. Thankfully, they're rare punctuation in an otherwise large sea of content. But let's set aside the urgency with Johnny and Arasaka for a few minutes. Remember a while back when I said that my boss's boss, Abernathy, came to fire me in a violent way? Well, it's because my boss, Jenkins, wanted to have her killed, and I was supposed to be the hitman. The fact that I made it out of Lizzie's bar alive to play the game for another 95 hours seems pretty charitable in retrospect. I got my office card and gym access taken away, but not the thick wad of cash that Jenkins gave me to pull off the hit. In a frantic underworld montage, I go around Night City being a silly goose. For all that I do in the game afterward, it reflects the massiveness of this world that I never heard from Jenkins or Abernathy again. As a newly minted for-hire mercenary, the city becomes your playground. If you've ever played an open worlder before, you already know what to expect. A map full of mission icons, but never excessively so. Cyberpunk's non-critical path content doesn't feel like a batch of extras or a checklist of shit to do. Even when it literally is, it feels like an organic and natural extension of the world. So many of the game's secondary quests spawn from the main quest lines, spinning up and spinning off new people to meet with tasks that extend from the initial work that you do with them. You meet Judy Alvarez through her friend Evelyn Parker, the Evelyn Parker, who was originally hired by the Voodoo Boys to steal the biochip from Arasaka. Judy's questline has you try to take control of the Cloud's dollhouse, whose management ultimately passed Evelyn from person to person like a failed piece of equipment until she wound up doing XPDs for scavs. Many of these secondary questlines segue just like this, weaving webs of people and groups and motivations together into new, compelling stories. There were secondary quests that contextualized portions of the main quest that I didn't even work on until after I'd beaten the game. They're not even necessary. Of course, all of this works because you can't just binge on any quest line. As you complete each quest, you have to abide by a realistic gap before someone reaches out to you to offer the next quest in the line. This encourages you to pick through other offerings in the meantime. Rather than taking tasks from factions, you follow the plots and ambitions of individual fixers, seeing them grow in the process, rather than work up the ladder of organizations with simplistic philosophies. These fixers have individual motivations for why they do what they do. Mr. Hands moves you around like a chess piece. Regina Jones wants to cure cyberpsychosis, etc. This allows for some great character-driven quests, like breaking into an NCPD office to kick off a quest to find a serial killer. Another example is rescuing the leader of the Aldecados, being chased as you escape, then hiding out during a dust storm. You can use this intimate moment to allow your romance to potentially bloom with Pan Am too.
On behalf of the staff of the Independent California Motel, I wish you all sweet dreams.
As I talked about earlier, cyberpsychos are people who have fallen into a psychosis due in large part to their cybernetic enhancements. There are nearly 20 of these individuals across the Night City metropolitan area, each with their own backstory detailing how they fell into their individual madness. And the detective work isn't optional. To complete these gigs, you have to scour these arenas for clues about their undoing, to report back to Regina, who's trying to figure out the disorder. Cyberpsychos aren't just mini-bosses, they're people who have come to their situations somehow, some way. You may have met them at their worst, but they're still people. From an actress who loses her mind in a fake reality show, to a satanic summoning from a cold box, each situation places a big mirror to reflect how brutal this city is. Sharp-eyed viewers can even run into the violence-crazed cyberpsycho from the teaser trailer, who was converted into a violence-crazed Max Tack elite agent. In your travels, you'll find random skirmishes that you can break up. Some are flagged by NCPD for you to handle, while others are just clusters of people who don't like you, or won't like you if you hang around too long. For those looking for a balance to the stronghold-oriented quest puzzles the game offers, you can do vehicle collection quests and races that are on par with any urban open-worlder. You can also scan tarot cards on the sides of buildings in pursuit of building a whole deck, and some of them require an effort to track down. The map is great, working especially well considering the multi-dimensional nature of the city. Unfortunately, when placing markers to navigate to, it almost always provides car directions when you're on foot, so it'll have you walk up on-ramps without shoulders and other car infrastructure that's hostile to pedestrians. Shame. Shame. While the main quest is the cinematic high-production show of the game, it's the side quests that form the fabric of the city, thread by thread. There's even a columbarium where the various people in your journey will pop up when they die, something I didn't quite appreciate when I found it. There are gamers who find these side quests repetitive, especially the stronghold-oriented tasks, but I crave them. Being able to work each one like an individual puzzle box was great, because you never truly lose if you screw up an approach, which I often did. The game's not going to boot you because an alarm went off or an arbitrary individual got nicked. It becomes more about your mastery of skills than mission design. The most repetitive element may be the morally ambiguous conclusions that many quests provide. After you've beaten the small bads and then the bigger bads, you're often left with the choice of sparing or killing the target, each rendering different rewards. Or you can spare them and get one reward and then kill them immediately after for the other. They really feel like non-conclusions, pinging that moral corner of your brain, but lacking much in the way of consequences. If there's one issue I have with this quest structure, and it's something that inevitably happens when you have so many moving narrative components in a game like this, it's that anachronisms pop up. Characters will talk to you about things in quests as if you didn't just do another quest where things happen differently. It's rare, but it happens. Dogtown quest givers will still talk to you as though its military warlord Hansen is alive, even after you've killed him. In my Phantom Liberty conclusion, Judy will talk about leaving Night City because of the involuntary vacation you need to take. The thing is, I just completed the Judy quest line where she was going to leave Night City of her own accord after her quest line didn't conclude the way she'd imagined. But all of this is complicated by the inclusion of Dogtown and the Phantom Liberty you're tracking down inside it. At the top of the video, I mentioned that I plan to review Cyberpunk after they drop their planned paid expansion for the game, not even knowing the scope of that DLC or what it would include. Phantom Liberty is an intensely cinematic module that's designed to weave into the base game while also serving as another primary story to work through, providing its own endings. It unlocks a new district of Night City with its own distinct look, feel, and lore. It adds new quests to the rest of the city, and as I reached the second credit roll, it gave me a whole lot to think about too. CD Projekt also brought in another marquee star to serve as your companion, with Idris Elba as FIA agent Solomon Reed, someone you'll be working with quite a bit. After a major mainline quest involving the Voodoo Boys and Alt Cunningham, you get a random call from someone you don't know, Songbird, real name So Me, who's an elite hacker working deep, dirty ops for the president of the new United States of America. She's aware of your Silverhand situation, and with an invite to Dogtown, she offers a cure for what ails you if you help her out with her own situation. Responding to Songbird's call kicks off Phantom Liberty, which opens with a lengthy, linear, and very cinematic bit where you sneak into Dogtown via some very dark corners of the district's partially ruined stadium. You get to wander through a very interesting market before the president's ship, Space Force One, is shot down, nearly clipping you on its crashing descent before flashing a title card. You need to track down the president before Kurt Hansen's militia reach her first. Remember, he's the paramilitary warlord in charge here, and you race past selfie-taking Dogtown residents to get it done. In what feels like the premise of a B-movie, you reach President Myers and fight alongside her through abandoned venues with some very moody lighting, going so far as to slice out the tracker in her neck. The escape is atmospheric as fuck, punctuated by shootouts, understated QuickTime events, and this door I failed to duck under several times in a highly scripted event. I guess if I'd used the slide mechanic more often, it wouldn't have been a problem, but I thought a crouch would work, or maybe there'd be a button prompt. Nope. Instead, I had to crouch under the farthest left side of the stuck door. I don't know, I'm no game designer or whatever, but a little more telegraphing here would have been nice, as it serves as the only hiccup in this entire sequence of events gameplay-wise. Odder still, once you get Myers into a hiding spot, the search for her seems to die out entirely, even as she looks out over Dogtown from a very visible perch, and the district is really small. But this is beside the point. Songbird disappears after she takes over that giant robot spider I showed earlier, and some theatrical warfare happens in a museum. Seemingly lost to cyberspace or dead entirely, you have to find her. She's really important. Really important. Myers has you reach out to undercover Agent Reed to figure out the Songbird and Hansen situation and make decisions that affect the fate of, everything. Elba plays the somber Reed, an agent that Songbird had killed in a pre-release trailer that gets mentioned in the game. You can tell he's somber because his resting face looks really sad. Something that I wish the game had sold me on is the damage that Songbird's betrayal causes him, and how much he has to forgive in searching for her. Reed works with you to dig up Alex, another undercover agent in Dogtown. They have some beef of their own. Everyone you meet in this expansion seems to have beef. Reed is unwavering in his loyalty to the ideals of the NUSA and Myers. He reflects the undying stoicism that a patriot requires to overlook his leader's terrible actions. I mean, dude was nearly killed for his country several times, and he keeps trucking on, metaphorically waving the flag as he does. This loyalty becomes a liability over the course of his character arc. He's also a prominent taskmaster, weaving in and out of your missions here, but he doesn't rise to the permanent head avatar status that Johnny does. I wouldn't be surprised if Keanu Reeves had to do more work for this expansion than Elba did. Dogtown is an enclave in Night City, a bowl-shaped district that mimics the glow and show of the Las Vegas Strip, complete with a nightclub in the shape of a pyramid. Even though the rest of the game looks good, Dogtown looks even more beautiful technically. As the lore goes, this was once a prosperous in development and highly sought after place to visit until an abandoned Militech AI facility was discovered underneath it. Militech and then a series of paramilitary organizations took control, walling Dogtown off from the rest of the city. Now it sits here rotting and unfinished, harboring those drummed out of Night City who don't want to be found. It's not great here, the result of Hansen and his army, a brutal combination that refuses to cooperate with the outside world except to perpetuate their arms business. Over the course of the Phantom Liberty campaign, which takes place almost exclusively in Dogtown, you'll experience some very interesting missions and encounter some very interesting set pieces. My favorite might be the heist mission that features a Casino Royale-esque finale, the closest that Idris Elba might ever get to a James Bond property. It says a lot that so many of Night City's VIPs will show up at a Hansen party like it's no issue, as if the Warlord's a legitimate party in this town. Unfortunately, just before the sequence, you have to wade through a Max Payne 2-ish escort sniper section. Ugh. Songbird calls Dogtown Night City's swollen appendix. It's a lot like what a recovered Fallout City would look like, with dust, debris, and despair everywhere. It just needs some mutants and some two-headed Brahmin to finish the look. It has a single security checkpoint to get in or out by vehicle or on foot. It's a big show with a lot of security and a large scanner when you arrive or depart, but it seems largely fangless. Even if you have a stolen vehicle, they won't stop you. You'll come to understand this very well yourself because you'll leave and return to Dogtown quite a few times, especially if you start Phantom Liberty as soon as Songbird calls you. Some Phantom Liberty quests will send you back out into Night City with new standalone quests like El Capitan's storyline or his vehicle collection quests. Similar to my gripe about anachronisms earlier, taking on side quests during this time back in town can be weird because these people are often still unaware of the events that have happened in the Phantom Liberty campaign. The advantage of talking about the main Cyberpunk campaign and the Phantom Liberty campaign separately, even though they can be played simultaneously, is to highlight how different they are. Cyberpunk's campaign has a lot to say about personhood and the status of the mind and soul, especially when they're augmented by cybernetics. Phantom Liberty's is more linear and cinematic, and says, well, what does it say? What is Phantom Liberty about thematically? Not much. I played Phantom Liberty after I'd completed the main campaign, and I don't know if it was for better or worse versus playing them both at the same time. It's a lot to think about and take in at once, even if they're designed to commingle. Relic glitches tend to be more severe in the main storyline, and if I had started Phantom Liberty as soon as So Me calls you, I think it would have made a little bit more sense chronologically. So Me is a massive digital weapon as a result of breaching the Black Wall and doing cyberspace stuff. This causes her to lose her mind and seek out that abandoned AI project under Dogtown. It's at the high roller party at the Black Sapphire that you finally meet her in person, and not just her digital counterpart, Songbird. It's then that you realize how much she's been physically modified to do the work that she's employed to do by the FIA and Myers, who all but disappears from the story at this point. You don't discover until much later that So Me was once a hobbyist hacker and troll who got into so much trouble that, under duress, she signs away her life and body to become a tool for the FIA. Guess who's there to make the case for the government? None other than Reed. Phantom Liberty is ultimately about Reed and So Me, flawed people in different ways. So Me keeps lying and betraying people to save her own skin and move out from under the yoke of the NUSA as the Black Wall consumes her consciousness. Reed keeps forgiving her even as she was responsible for his near murder because he believes so strongly in the NUSA that he will continue to abide by their plans without question. In the classic thought experiment of an unstoppable force meeting an unmovable object, you're the one with the can of grease deciding which one prevails. In several key decisions, you have to pick between Reed's stoicism and So-Mi's chaos. Once more, I made a series of choices that match what I would have picked personally. As So-Mi merges further with the ancient AI under Dogtown, the game becomes its scariest yet as a robotic dog seeks you out. It's during these terrifying moments that it becomes its most introspective as it details So-Mi's life before, during, and after the hell she suffered to become as weaponized as she's become. In that old AI orb, I could have mercifully ended So-Mi's life, but I believe that Reed could get her across the border to a Ripperdoc who could free her into a new life without the NUSA's tethers holding her back. Instead, you're intercepted at the border. Even though she's a burned out tool at this point, they airlift her out to fix her up and redeploy her regardless of the state of her humanity. Through my hands, a vicious cycle has been allowed to continue looping, seemingly without end, with real human costs. Based on how I've played, I wound up with what I've read is the worst ending, one that augments and replaces the devil ending that I got from playing this game alone. After a cinematic Bond-esque credit roll, you have an epilogue where the NUSA offers to take care of your Silverhand problem. Once again, is there a realm where both myself and Johnny live? In this case, no. As we ride out onto the sunset, I feel like I'm truly saying goodbye to Johnny. He doesn't fight you despite his clear anger and frustration because he has no choice. This is it for him. You awaken in a hospital bed to see Reed. He reveals that the process to remove Johnny and the biochip took 2 years rather than the 2 months I'd told Vic and Pan Am before I left. My vacancy causes me to lose so many vital connections I'd made in Night City, even becoming evicted from my apartment. Similar to the devil ending I received from the main campaign, the damage I experienced removing Johnny was personally catastrophic. But rather than being a death sentence, V's nervous system can no longer handle cyberware, so he's reduced to becoming a vanilla human being once more. He'll get to live, but he will no longer be able to perform any of the epic feats that allowed him to craft his legend or make it through the campaign. Returning to Night City without any powers or friends hurt a lot, especially as I clung to a little bit of hope that Vic would figure out a way to make my chrome work again, despite the fact that the nation's best doctor said there was no chance. Seeing friends make lateral moves or ending up worse off really stung. As someone who worked retail for so long, it was a bit like stepping into my store to see my former coworkers hanging in there as everyone else around them shifted. Who knows what V will do after this? You can't even handle some low-level thugs when just a few years ago you were carving up elite megacorp guards. Rogue tells you that your legend is tarnished and your once romantic partner advises you to not reach out to them again through a mutual friend. It's a cold shower that overshadows the cushy, boring desk job that Reed offers you, which is at least something. It's such a morose ending that punched me right in the feels. It made me reflect on friendships and relationships I had that didn't work out in the real world and how things could have been different, or if it was even possible. Even though I rolled back to a previous save so that I could continue working on other quests, it was briefly tempting to go back for a happier ending. I'd spent the entire game to that point building these relationships from scratch and building my character up to an unassailable skill tier just to see it smashed up because of a single choice. I chose myself over Johnny. We cry that so many stories give us unrealistic endings for the sake of not concluding on a down note. But I know what my other options are. The video game content farms of the internet were more than happy to summarize them for me. As my V disappeared into the crowd to become anonymous, the credits rolled yet again. It felt like a good time to hunker down and accept the consequences of my actions. It was a slug to the gut, yeah, but it was a good one.
Hey, did you sleep all right?
Cyberpunk 2077 is such an incredible game. It isn't as approachable as Grand Theft Auto 5 or other similar open-worlders, but if you don't stumble through the door, it is substantially more rewarding than those games. Around every corner there's a lot of, well, this feels like something I've experienced in another game, mated to, well, no one's done it this well before. It's successful to the extent that playing Grand Theft Auto 6 will be interesting to say the least, with how Rockstar balances approachability with new mechanics, sometimes of dubious function. Cyberpunk is sophisticated in big, meaningful ways. It's GTA meets Deus Ex, and it feels so seamless. Everything has an extra layer to it, extra options, extra choices that make you feel like you're truly playing a virtualized tabletop RPG. It can even be overwhelming. There is such an immense quantity of meaningful tasks and choices in this game, and an absurd quantity and density to the art. There is so much going on visually that I almost felt guilty driving a car, because anything faster than walking speed makes me feel like I'm not properly absorbing the amount of content that CD Projekt Red created. The more I played Cyberpunk, the more I enjoyed it. The cruelty the game initially presents seems to fade as it progresses, as the city feels smaller, and as the characters seem to endear to you. Or maybe the writing just wasn't up for being so fucking mean all the time. Looking back through my footage, everyone seems so hostile to you initially, but as you wrap up individual personal quest lines, they come across as real people with actual humanity. The game starts like a smack in the face and winds down like a pat in the back. It evolves from being a tale of how cruel this dystopia is to a tale about living with it. While Eidos Montreal's Deus Ex games focused on transhumanism and the culture war that would come out of it, and GTA continues to be a big, dumb, and lazy pastiche of American culture, Cyberpunk wants you to think about what it means to be a person and how technology changes that. It doesn't beat you over the head about it. Instead, it masterfully weaves its thesis into its design, writing, and quests. And then you get to blast people in the face, or cut off their heads violently. As justifiably angry as gamers and CD Projekt Red employees were alike in response to the horrible shape this game shipped in and the years that followed as they fixed it, we are very much in the positive now that the game has been brought, finally, to a completed state. Should they have just waited however many years it would have taken to include all the features they'd planned and to fix the known shippable issues before they sent it to retailers around the world? Yeah, sure, but maybe the extremely harsh response gave them the extra kick in the ass they needed to be humble about their craft after The Witcher 3, which was an enormous hit, made them extremely arrogant. I think by braving the waves of brutal criticism they received, they gave us a better game as a result. Cyberpunk is an epic open-world masterpiece. Even after a years-long make-good tour, it's got its flaws. How could it not? I'm not the biggest fan of how these two large story campaigns exist in this game. I'm not a huge fan of how it tapers off with randomly generated quests once you've consumed all the A, B, and C tier content. But that seems like the natural conclusion of any kind of game like this. It's also interesting that Deus Ex, a game that this feels very much modeled after, was itself inspired by role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons and Cyberpunk, which this game clearly builds on. In so many ways, Cyberpunk 2077 and Deus Ex are like digital cousins of the same analog fathers, and it's not hard to see how their strength lies in such strong gameplay and lore going back 4 decades. And that's not even including the literary references, the neuromancers, and snow crashes. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that can only come from 1 or 2 successful developers operating in a bubble, where a publisher or parent company isn't knocking on the door on a regular basis asking for a product. This game is a rarity, one that other developers should look to for perspective on what the state of the art is and what can be done given unlimited time, money, technology, and talent. There's so much content here. Every frame is full of so much detail that was placed by actual talented human people. The game is immense in its detail, scope, and ambition. Of course, it was the unlimited budget and unrestrained design that CD Projekt wrote for itself that ultimately caused all of its launch issues to begin with. But most importantly, this is a game with heart. Through its cybernetic metaphors, it's connecting you with other plausible characters, rather than through the superficial pursuit of wealth, fancy cars, and other highly valued assets. I realize there's a non-trivial number of gamers who will play this as a game, and little more than that, slicing through it like wheat to be harvested, picking apart each piece of the experience and documenting them individually for others. People like reviewers who do those kinds of dry, non-cohesive assessments too, but Cyberpunk excels because it's more than just how many quests it has or how interesting its cast is. It's a big deal because it's fundamentally an experience about being human. It's not hard to see that future open-world games and immersive sims will be compared to Cyberpunk 2077 for years to come. Oh my goodness, we have reached the end of Nth Review number 23. Wow. I've really got to thank my producers up front, my Patreon producers. James Wyatt, Lee Kenyon, Mitchell, Ozboy, Rain101, Romega, Scott, and Yahoo Silverman. Thank you guys so much. I want to thank you initially. I'm breaking in this new early access. Well, I've done a few early access reviews before. If you're a Patreon supporter, you get it earlier. But thank you so much for your financial support, your logistical support, and being on Discord, being on the Nth Review Discord. Why are you not on the Nth Review Discord if, like, you're watching this video still? How are you still watching this video and you're not? If you're watching this video still, you got to go to the Discord anyway. Thank you all so much. This has been an incredible game. It's hard to believe it's been 4 months since I started playing it. And I got sidetracked a little bit with the End City stuff when the Urban Renewal or Urbanist YouTube video popped off. I thought that would explode in its own different way. It didn't, so it's like, all right, let's get Cyberpunk out. Let's get the next game out. I've got a few ideas for what's next. So stay tuned for what's going on there. If you're not already a subscriber, if you're not already a Patreon supporter, go ahead and, hey, you know what's going on. And I'm just kind of rambling. Thank you. Thank you for watching this. It was really fun to get into this game after 10 years. After the teasers and everything like that. So, but I've just been telling you that for the past 2 hours. So anyway, all that said, I will see you next time, okay? Pew, 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 pew.